Hello and welcome to the Law School Application Process Essentials Tips for Later Applicants webinar. I'm Nicole Dilchase, Assistant Dean for Admissions.
And I'm Gabriella Amador, Director of Admissions. Thanks for joining us.
Today's webinar is designed to provide you with suggestions for how to enhance your application if you're applying later in the admissions cycle. We'll also cover some of the common admissions questions that we receive from later applicants. After that, we'll open it up for your questions. We hope our presentation will provide you with useful information as you prepare your applications. So first, the good news. You're not applying too late in the admissions cycle, and there are still many law schools looking for strong candidates. Some law schools may have application deadlines that are after March LSAT scores are released. At other schools, the deadlines may be suggested or priority deadlines rather than absolute deadline dates. In those cases, the school will continue to accept applications after the suggested or priority deadline. And that's the type of deadline that we have at Chicago-Kent. So we have a suggested date, but we continue to take applications after that date. And then at schools where the deadline has passed, some may still accept applications. So it's always best to check with each school where you're interested in applying to determine if they're still accepting applications. So however, and there's a big however with this, time is of the essence. Law school admission is competitive, and it becomes even more so the later that you wait to apply. So you do want to make sure you get your applications in as early as possible if you're applying later in the cycle. So with that, we're going to share with you some of our top tips for later applicants.
So we'll start with our most important tip. Don't delay submitting your application. So the school has an upcoming spring application deadline. Do not wait until the deadline to apply. If your application is ready, go ahead and submit the application. This will allow your file to be processed ahead of the other March LSAT takers who wait to apply, and may mean that your file is reviewed a bit earlier than the other applicants. And please note, if you submit your application before the LSAT score is available or your CAS report is complete, your file will not be reviewed until your application is complete.
So our second tip is to put together a strong application package and do whatever you can to make it stand out from the crowd. And there's a couple of things you can do. First, make sure you've carefully chosen your recommenders. So you want to ask for recommendations from people who know you well and who can comment on the qualities that will make you a successful law student. You also want to make sure that you've highlighted any unique qualities or experiences that you may have, so things that may make you different from other applicants in the pool or give you a unique perspective. And then it's also important to remember that every component of your application is important. You never know what part of your application may end up playing a bigger role. So this includes, the big items like your personal statement, but even the smaller communications that you might have with the admissions office, addendums that you might include with your application. Make sure that every piece that you're including with your application is really tight, that you carefully proofread it, and that you're submitting the strongest package possible.
Our third tip, stay in contact with your recommenders if you are still waiting for their letters to arrive at LSAC. So as you can imagine, recommenders are often busy and may need a friendly reminder to submit a recommendation. If you have not yet required your recommendation, or if you have not yet requested your recommendations, you want to do that right away. It can take several weeks for your recommenders to write and submit their recommendations.
And our next tip is to make sure that you've designated in your LSAC account one or more recommendations for each school to which you're applying. So if you don't assign a letter to a particular school, that school will never receive it from LSAC and your file will remain incomplete. This is a really common mistake because you often think, you have 4, 5, 6 recommendations on file and you assume that everything's set, but you've actually forgotten to assign one to a school. So make sure you double check in your account that you've done that. And then for expediency, consider submitting only the required number of recommendation letters if you find yourself in the situation of still waiting for some of your recommendations to arrive. So for example, if a school requires at least 1 recommendation but will accept up to 4, and you have 2 letters on file that are ready to go, it may be better to apply with those 2 recommendations rather than waiting for the additional letters to arrive. So more is not necessarily better if it causes a delay in completing your application file. You need to think carefully about how much the content of those additional letters might impact the admissions decision and weigh that against the possible impact of applying later in the cycle.
All right, and tip number 5, make sure LSAC has received all of your transcripts and be sure to follow up on any missing transcripts. You are required to send all of your undergraduate and graduate transcripts to LSAC for inclusion in your CAS report. This includes transcripts from schools where you later transferred credits to your degree granting school or where you took only 1 or 2 courses. Applicants sometimes forget to send a transcript, and this can delay review of your file. Be proactive and make sure you include every transcript.
Our next tip, consider writing an addendum if you retook the LSAT in March and your score improves. So you can use the addendum to let the admissions committee know the factors that you believe contributed to the increase. This gives us more confidence that the higher score is most representative of your abilities and your performance on the LSAT. We give preference to the highest score, and many law schools do that, but the addendum just helps us to understand better the context in which you took the exams and factors that may have impacted your score. And addendums can also be useful for any other part of your application where the admissions committee might have a question. So this may be something like a period of poor academic performance in undergrad. It's always best to let us hear from you with an explanation rather than to leave us guessing about what happened.
Tip number 7, create a spreadsheet or use some other system to track key information for each school that you are considering. You can use this system to track the application deadlines, documents required, number of recommendations, your application status, etc. Once admitted, you can continue to use it to track deposit deadlines, visit dates, and other deadlines.
And then our last tip, after submitting your applications, be proactive in checking with each school to make sure your file is complete. So you want to allow about 1 week after submitting your application before checking to see if your file is complete, if you haven't heard from the school. And you may have heard from the school before then that it's complete. But law schools can make mistakes, so by being proactive, you can prevent any delays in completing and reviewing your application. You should also become familiar with and use Applicant Status Online, or ASO. Each law school that you apply to will send you a unique username and password for their ASO system. And this allows you to see which documents have been received by the school and just make sure that everything's on file, on track with completing your admissions file. So now what we'd like to do is cover some of the top questions that we get from later applicants. And then once we're done with that, we'll be opening things up for your questions.
All right, so the first question that we receive from later applicants is, how will applying later in the application cycle or after the application deadline be viewed by the admissions committee? Will it be seen as a negative? Should I offer an explanation for why I applied late? So first, no, it's not a negative. We welcome later applications, and we understand that sometimes you'll apply when it's the best time for you. The March LSAT exists for a reason, so there are law schools that want apps from March test takers. While some law schools may have strict application deadlines that have already passed, there are other law schools that are still accepting applications. In fact, LSAC is adding additional test dates in future cycles because law schools want applicants to have more flexibility and more options for applying in each admission cycle. If you have not yet done so, you may want to opt into the Candidate Referral Service, CRS, through your lsac.org account. This allows law schools to reach out to you about their programs, and it's a great way to find out which schools are still accepting applications and discover potential scholarship opportunities. Some schools offer application fee waivers as well.
The next question is, should I apply later in the cycle, or is it better to wait to apply early in the next cycle? And so I really think you should apply now if you'd like to attend this year. It's true it may be more competitive later in the cycle, but many law schools still have room for strong applicants in the class. And you don't know what will happen with your application until you give the admissions committee a chance to review it. And in the worst case scenario, if you're not successful this year, you can always reapply for the following cycle and you'll be all set to submit an early application.
Next question, can I retake the LSAT in June if I'm not happy with my March score? So Chicago-Kent will consider the June 2019 LSAT for admission to the fall 2019 entry class. Policies do vary by school, so you should check with each law school that you are considering. The June scores, however, timing and scholarships are an issue because the scores arrive very late in the admission cycle. And there is a risk that the class is full or that the scholarships are no longer available. But you need to balance the likelihood of increasing your score against the potential risks of applying later in the cycle.
And the next question is, are scholarships still available for later applicants? So this will really vary by school, and so you'll want to, again, check with each school that you're considering. Depending on budgetary considerations at particular schools, it may be more competitive for awards and funds may be limited. At Chicago-Kent, we do still have scholarship funding available for strong candidates, and all applicants are automatically considered for scholarships as part of the admissions review process. And scholarship recipients are typically notified in the acceptance letter. So with that, we'd like to open things up for your questions. There's a questions box in the webinar software, and you can type in your question, and we would be happy to answer those for you. So we're just going to give you a moment to get the questions in. All right, we do have our first question. So is there a way to tell what schools are lacking applicants in the current cycle and would be better to apply to, or a way to understand just sort of which schools might be the best to focus on? So there really isn't a good way to do that other than just calling or emailing each of the schools that you're considering. Other than, I guess, the other option would be this, if you make sure you're signed up for the candidate referral service that we had mentioned earlier, because through that, schools will start to reach out to you as soon as the March LSAT scores are available to law schools. And so you'll have schools reaching out, encouraging you to apply, and obviously that's a great way to find out which schools are still actively recruiting applicants. But I would also encourage you to just call any schools that you're considering as well. Please type in any additional questions that you have. And we did get a question too about whether there would be a summary or recording of the webinar available afterwards. And it will be available to be going out to you probably the next day or two, so you get a copy of it.
So another question we have now is, if I apply and I'm not admitted, does that hurt my chances for admission the following year? So we do get this question, and it does not. So if you apply late in the cycle for whatever reason, and let's say that the school does not admit you, generally when you reapply, you're going to be looked at with fresh eyes the following admission cycle. So it wouldn't hurt your chances if for whatever reason you were not admitted in that cycle to reapply the very next year at the same school.
So next question was another question about the candidate referral service, whether this, if you opt into the candidate referral service, does this increase your likelihood of getting a scholarship? So opting into it, it's really a convenience to both you as an applicant, a prospective student, and to the law schools. It allows law schools that are looking for students like you to reach out to you proactively and let you know about their programs. So it doesn't increase your likelihood of a scholarship, but what it might do is make you aware of scholarship opportunities and opportunities at law schools that you otherwise might not have become aware of. And then there are some law schools that will offer application fee waivers to CRS candidates as well. If we don't have an application fee at Chicago-Kent, but some schools do. So that's another way to find out about application fee waivers. So next question is, would it make more sense to apply to a school using March LSAT or weighted if you believe you could increase your score by, say, 4 points on the June test?
It really depends on what that score is and what the, for example, what the median LSAT for that school was the previous year. Sometimes looking at the school's median LSAT will help you see how competitive your LSAT score is. So if your score is close to that median, I would say go ahead and just apply with your current score. You know, if, for example, you could be placed on the wait list, that June LSAT score may come in handy at that point. But you know, 3 or 4 points, it really just depends on the median LSAT score for that school, and then what your current LSAT score is in comparison.
Yeah, and a lot of these really come down to kind of your judgment about what you think is going to be best. And it's, you know, it's even hard for us to know what our class might look like in July when those June LSAT scores come out. So, you know, there are years where we can admit June LSAT takers, there are years where the class is really full. So it's, you know, it's always, you've got to use sort of your best judgment about what you think will work well for you. Next question is, does the law school ever look at sort of the combination of factors that make up the LSAT score? So for example, if someone did well in the logic games, but not as well in the reading comprehension. And unfortunately we don't, because we only get the one final score. Unlike a test like the GRE where there's the different component scores, you see those individual scores. We don't get that with the LSAT, so we are only looking at your overall score on each exam. Next question is, how does Chicago Kent handle sort of split LSAT scores where there's a significant difference between the two scores?
So we do give preference to the higher score, but we definitely recommend addressing the lower score and why you think the admissions committee should give more weight to the higher score. We do like to hear, especially if the difference is pretty large. So say more than 6 or 7 points. It would be a good idea to write a statement just saying why you think that your higher score is more indicative of your abilities.
Okay, then a sort of a follow-up question to that, what if the big split is a difference between LSAT score and GPA? And so this could go either way. So sometimes with applicants with very strong LSAT scores, but very weak undergraduate grades, or the converse where the LSAT score is maybe a weak score or an average score, but extremely strong undergraduate performance. So that's, it's very common. We see that with a lot of applicants. That's why when we review admissions files, we are reading the entire application file. We're looking at the full transcript. We're reading those addendums to see if you're telling us about any things that maybe happened during your undergraduate years that might have impacted your abilities to really perform up to your potential, or things that may have impacted your performance on the LSAT. So it is not uncommon for us to see that. We definitely admit applicants like that. It's, it's very, very individualized review.
Yeah, and I would just add to that sometimes what we'll look at, for example, if your GPA is lower, we'll look at when did you graduate, what have you done since you've graduated, do you have any graduate coursework? So we do try to look at the entire picture. Sometimes other components of your application might help offset a lower GPA. And then of course, if your LSAT, you feel that you didn't perform well and you want to write something about that, you can also address that in your application.
So next question is, do law schools favor applicants who take time off over applicants who go straight to law school? I think that really, somewhat depends on the school. At Chicago Kent, we really want applicants, a mix of applicants. And so we have, a fair number of our applicants are coming straight from undergrad, but then we also have people who take time off. It's probably most common for people to work maybe 1 to 5 years, but we have applicants coming back after, long periods of time out working and coming back to law school. And so we like to have that mix of students in the class. So we don't give preference to work experience over not having work experience, but we do look at the application sort of in the context of where that person is in their life. So obviously if you're coming right from undergrad, we're not expecting that you've had really significant work experience. You may have, but many people don't. They've had some internships, they work some part-time jobs, but they've been mainly focused on earning the undergraduate degree. Other applicants who've been out working for a while, then we do actually have more significant work experience to look at, and so we're factoring that into the decision. What has this person done since they graduated? What have they accomplished in their career? What skills that they developed? So it really impacts more how we review the file as opposed to having preference for one over the other. You may encounter some law schools, though, that do prefer that you have work experience before applying. So again, that's something you want to check with at each school that you're considering. Our next question was about how is professional experience viewed for those who've been out of school for an extended period of time. So I did somewhat cover that, just that we will definitely factor that in. And likewise, if you've gone on to do graduate work as well, we will also look at that graduate coursework. That's generally considered sort of a plus factor in your application as long as you did well in your graduate program. That gives us some additional academic work to look at. It's academic work at a higher level. Often you'll have additional recommendations as well. If you have significant work experience, it's definitely good to make sure that that's really well explained for us, either through your resume or through having employers write a reference letter for you so we get a sense of what you've been doing.
And just to add really quick, while it's not required to submit a resume, I often find the resume very helpful in reviewing applications and looking at your work experience and other, volunteer activities and things of that. So a resume is helpful.
Okay, the next question was just a follow-up. I had mentioned that the webinar will be recorded. The recording will be available, and so the question was how will viewers access that afterwards? So it'll be sent out by email to everyone who attended the webinar today, but we'll also have it up on our website. It usually takes probably about a week to get it up on the website, but we will have it up on the video channel for the law school, on the law school website, as well as linked up to our webinar page on the admissions website. So next question was about what do we consider significant work experience? So would 2 years be considered significant?
I guess it depends on what the work experience is, but I would say, yeah, anything 2 or 3 years after undergrad work experience, professional work experience especially, will be considered significant.
Yeah, and I think it's, work experience always helps. And so we sometimes get sort of a corollary question to that with is it better to get some work experience or to come, right through from undergrad, maybe sort of the applicants sort of torn on what they want to do. And if you're not feeling ready to start law school, it never hurts to go out and get work experience. You're going to develop a lot of useful skills out in the professional work world, time management, project management, just understanding how businesses work. So there's a lot of great skills you can develop. So if you're not ready to go to law school, by all means, go out and work for a while and come back and apply when you're ready. We'll always be here. But if you're raring to go and you want to start, then there's no reason not to go ahead and apply right away. Okay, so the next question is, if I don't have recommendation letters from work only from undergrad, would this hurt my application?
No, if you've been out of undergrad for a few years, we do expect to see something more recent, but if you are just completing undergrad, then submitting your letters of recommendation from your undergrad professors is completely acceptable and fine with us.
Yeah, and academic, we always, if you can get an academic recommendation, we always encourage you to have one, and that, goes in. No matter how long you've been out working, but we just expect the longer you're out working, the less likely it is you're still in contact with professors. But professors tend to write really strong recommendations just because they've seen you over the course of 1 or more semesters, graded your academic work, and can give a real strong assessment of your abilities. And the next question was, how is significant professional success viewed when the academics background is not as strong? So would that compensate for it?
It can definitely help offset, academics that perhaps are below the school's median, but I wouldn't say it's going to, erase your undergraduate performance because, in the end, the schools really only have your LSAT and your undergraduate GPA to sort of determine your likelihood for success here in law school. So they still are valued and weighed pretty heavily, but of course, if you've been successful and you've been out of school for a few years and you've done really well, that can certainly help strengthen your application.
And it is something definitely that we look to so if we're reviewing an applicant who has less desirable undergraduate academic record and they're telling us that, maybe it's because they just weren't mature or focused at that time, or there were other issues that impacted their work. Seeing that they went on and were successful in the work world can give us confidence that yes, this person really is likely to do well in law school despite the earlier performance. And that's ultimately what we're trying to get a sense of, is how are you likely to perform in law school. Next question was, should personal statements target what we've done over our time since graduation, particularly if we've been out working for a while?
So at Chicago Penn, we don't tell you what you should write about. We really want to get to know you and, get a better sense of who you are. So we really like for you to use your judgment. It's also used as a writing sample, so we're really looking to see that you have good writing skills. And we really just like for you to use your judgment. We do like to learn more about what your interests are, what sets you apart. I think your personal statement is really your opportunity to connect with the admissions committee, so you don't want to just go over your accomplishments, your resume, or your work experience, or your undergraduate experience, but you really want to talk about, what you think is unique about you or what your goals are. Again, a way to connect with the admissions committee on a more personal level. But again, the writing component is just to see that you have good writing skills.
And if you do choose to talk about what you've done professionally, you definitely want to make sure you're not just restating your resume, that you're telling us about either what you've learned or perhaps what you've been doing professionally has now brought you to the point of applying to law school. So you're telling us why you're interested in going to law school, what you're hoping to accomplish in your career. So you always want to sort of focus what you're writing around, helping us to get a better understanding of kind of who you are and why you're interested in coming to law school, what skills, unique abilities, perspectives you bring to the table as a prospective student. It's tough to write the personal statement, but they're really useful for us in understanding, getting better understanding of who you are and what you're hoping to accomplish. So we've got time probably for one more question, if there are any other questions. I know you guys are all anxiously waiting for the March LSAT scores to come out.
Good luck.
Yes, we do wish you luck. We hope you're all happy with your score. And we realize too, you may have questions that come up after the webinar ends. So we encourage you just, contact the admissions office. You can always call our office. You can send us an email. We're always happy to answer questions for you. And if you haven't yet had a chance to visit Chicago Kent, we do tours Monday through Friday. So we'd love to have you come visit the school as well. It's always great to get a chance to see the school in person. So we are just about out of time. So I would like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. And definitely hope you will stay in contact, and we wish you well with your application process and with the start of your law school careers. Thank you.